Okay, we're going to get started. My name is Aviva Ali, and I'm the current Sisterhood Chair.
Assalamualaikum everyone. I'm Moise Hassan, and I'm the current Brotherhood Chair.
I first want to start out by thanking you all for coming today. I want to thank the FSA Executive Board, Co-President Zach and Shania, all the volunteers that made this seminar possible, and all of you for attending. The reason why I decided to do this seminar is because Muslim women is a subject that's often overlooked in Islam, and I wanted to shed light on some of the most amazing women in Islam, as they were a part of the advancement of Islam as well as Muslim women today. We have a great group of women speaking today, so hopefully you will leave today with some inspirational information that will motivate you to become a changing force in your community, inshallah.
So I'm pretty much here to emphasize the importance of brothers being with us today. Immediately, most of us associate like a women-themed conference just for women, but that's not the case because women have done a lot for Islam especially, and I think that oftentimes brothers overlook that fact. And you know, it's important for brothers to come, you know, to these kind of events. So I'm really happy to see three brothers here. That's good. Yeah, more on the way, I think. And I just want to thank all brothers and sisters who have joined us today to make that happen, inshallah. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase all our knowledge and make us better Muslims for it.
Okay, so at this time we're going to introduce the first pair of MCs for today. Our first MC for today is going to be Alia Hassan. She's a junior in majoring in political science.
And the second MC will be Mashoud Salahuddin. He is majoring in Ottoman history as a pre-med major.
So you guys can come up here.
Yay! Woo!
Assalamualaikum guys.
Salam everyone.
So our first session today is work hard, pray hard.
Today we'll be talking about influential women in Islam, and we have the lovely Mariam Abukar who will be doing us the honor of discussing that topic.
Mariam Abukar is currently a first-year medical student at the Ohio Heritage College of Osteopathic Medicine.
She received a Bachelor of Science in Nutrition Science from The Ohio State University in 2010. In the interim time between her undergraduate and graduate degrees, she was involved in the community, serving as a board of director for the Newer Islamic Cultural Center.
Meanwhile, she received training in transformational leadership and personal development from various institutes. Mariam enjoys coaching others, especially youth, to pursue their inner passion and to find overall well-being of the mind, body, and spirit.
So please join us in welcoming Mariam.
Thanks guys. Assalamu alaikum. Can you guys hear me okay? How are you today? How are you this morning? Good. Jazakallah for being here on a Sunday. I know you guys could be doing anything else, so. So I guess my topic for today is to talk about influential women in Islam and to kind of delve a little bit into the rights that Islam gives to women. And so I always like to give like a little personal spin also on some of the talks that I give. So forgive me if I dabble into someone else's topic here. I know on the first one it's always hard to gauge other talks. So stop me if I'm going into someone else's topic. But to start off today, I wanted to start off with a translation of a verse of the Quran, and that's chapter 33, ayah 35. And for those of you that are familiar with the Quran, I'm gauging most of us. Any non-Muslims here? Let me gauge the audience first. Any non-Muslims, raise your hand. Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
What is your name?
My name is Joe.
Joe. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Anybody else? No? Okay. So for those of you that are familiar with this might be redundant, but for those of you that aren't, the chapter 33 in the Quran, ayah 35 says, "For Muslim men and Muslim women, for believing men and believing women, for devout men and devout women, for true men and true women, for men and women who are patient and constant, for men and women who humble themselves, for men and women who give in charity, for men and women who fast and deny themselves, for men and women who guard their chastity, and for men and women who engage much in God's praise. For them has God prepared forgiveness and a great reward. And interestingly enough, a woman by the name of Nusayba bint Ka'b al-Ansariya was one of the first advocates for the rights of Muslim women. Notably, she asked the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, why does God only address men in the Quran? Soon after this exchange, the Prophet received a revelation in chapter 33, verse 35, that mentions women can attain every quality in which men have access. And the verse also conclusively settled that women stand on the same spiritual level as men. And she was viewed as a visionary who transcended her own generation. So as a result of her inquiry, as a result of her strength, as a result of her curiosity, as a result of her advocacy for women, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God, sent down a revelation to the Prophet Muhammad. And this is what we have today. And before I begin to speak about the common characteristics of women in Islam and other past influential women of Islam, I preface this talk with the issue of cultural clutter. To anyone who observes the Muslim world, we're a world of a lot of cultural clutter, a lot of cultural baggage. And I'm fortunate enough to have been taught Islam in America, where I could delineate the Western, quote unquote, and quote unquote Muslim cultures and look at Islam through a religious lens that was not clouded by the cultures of the Middle Eastern world or the South Asian world or whatever other world that's out there that tries to define the Muslim world. A world where I was able to see the teachings of Islam as a mercy in a society where I'm being conditioned to think that my worth is defined by lots of things, like, for example, my level of attractiveness or my ability to sexualize, whatever the case may be, but not necessarily what Islam or what true feminism really is all about. So I bring a non-culture to Islam. And wherever culture overrules Islam, we have to keep in mind that women suffer. Why? Well, let's take a look at some examples. Let's look at Afghanistan. When women in Afghanistan have suffered as a result of culture overruling Islam, it has been taught to them that women cannot be educated, and we all know that that is not Islam. But it makes the rest of the world think that this is Islam. And I cannot answer to any of those cultures, and I can only explain what the faith says and to what I have observed of the American culture. And in addition to this, in this talk, I feel obligated to juxtapose the Islamic feminism with American feminism. And let's begin with what might be more familiar to most of you, which is the history of the American feminist movement. So apologize, you guys have not come here for a lecture on history, but I think it's very pertinent to know where we are today in our American culture, because whether we like it or not, for those of us that are Muslim women here in this audience, we are going to be influenced, and we have been influenced by the American culture. We have to know where we stand and how that relates to Islam. So America in the mid-1800s was a really exciting time for women. There was much talk about equal rights and the future of opportunity for women. In 1848, the first women's rights convention was held in Seneca Falls, New York. And after 2 days of discussion and debate, 68 women and 32 men signed a Declaration of Sentiments, as they titled it, which outlined grievances and set the agenda for the women's rights movement. And after that, a set of 12 resolutions was adopted, calling for equal treatment of men and women under the law and voting rights for women. Afterwards, multiple national conventions were held yearly through 1860. And in the summer of 1869, a woman who you probably know, Susan B. Anthony, and also Elizabeth Cady Stanton formed the National Woman Suffrage Association. And the primary goal of the organization was to achieve voting rights for women by means of a congressional amendment to the Constitution. So they basically wanted us to be given the right to vote and for it to be a federal law. In the late fall, Lucy Stone, Henry Blackwell, and others formed the American Woman Suffrage Association, and this group focused exclusively on gaining voting rights for women through amendments to individual state constitutions. So they decided, okay, I guess we can't get to the federal government at this point, we're not there yet, let's start at the state level. In December of that year, the territory of Wyoming passed the first women's suffrage law. In the following year, women began serving on juries in the territory, and fast forward a few more years, many other states agreed to adopt this amendment. And in 1896, the National Association of Colored Women was formed. And in 1903, the National Women's Trade Union League was established to advocate for improved wages and working conditions for women. So as you can tell, there was a lot of deeper yearnings that women had at that time. They wanted equal rights to vote. They wanted equal rights and wages. They wanted even colored women at the time when this was a very exciting time for how Caucasians and African Americans were relating to one another, and yet there was the National Association of Colored Women that was formed. And in 1913, Alice Paul and Lucy Burns formed the Congressional Union, and they worked towards the passage of a federal amendment to give women the right to vote. And 3 years later, Margaret Sanger opened the first United States birth control clinic in Brooklyn, New York. And that was also very controversial because, birth control at the time was considered taboo. So, 3 years after that, in 1919, the Federal Woman Suffrage Amendment, originally written by Susan B. Anthony and introduced in Congress back in 1878, was passed by the House of Representatives and the Senate, and then it was sent to all 50 states for ratification. So, when did America give women the right to vote? 1920. When did Islam give women the right to vote? In the Quran, in its revelation, explicitly, over 1,400 years ago. In the 1930s, the feminist movement died down a bit in the United States due to the Depression, right? We all know about the Great Depression. And what happens, when families have trouble feeding their families and finding a place in the workforce? It's difficult to think about political freedoms. It's difficult to find time to discuss those types of things. And sadly, you'll see this is a common theme in our modern society, that it forces desire to disempower a community's social and political progression. They corrupt its economy, one of the ways. In the 1940s, World War II happened, and as men were sent off to war, women worked in factories to support the war effort. And during this period, the American woman got her first taste of financial independence. In the 1950s and early 1960s, America witnessed 10 years of an era of living up to the Joneses, if you will. Shows like Leave It to Beaver depicted this image of the perfect woman in America. And in this time, a burst of inventions were witnessed. This was when the icebox, aka the refrigerator, was invented. The vacuum. Oh my gosh, women no longer had to take out their rugs and smack them. They can use a vacuum. Mixers, coffee makers, freezers, and the list goes on and on. And because of all of these inventions, women had more free time to think about their political role in society, and the feminist movement picked up speed once again. Now, to juxtapose again the Islamic model for the few things that I said, during this time, laws were being rewritten to allow women the right to inherit. Women in southeastern U.S. could not inherit until the 1950s and 1960s, but Islam gave women the right to inherit over 1,400 years ago. And women in Islam were explicitly given the right to own property and were seen as independent legal entities. They were given the right to own and to manage their own money, business, and property, and they had the right to make legal contracts and keep their own full name after marriage. And not only that, women had the right to taste the financial independence that the American women first tasted in the 1940s. And not only that, women, whatever financial sum that they make is for them, and it is optional to give to their family, though most women do give to their families because they love them. But it's the man's right and obligation to provide for the family, and not necessarily the women's. So to keep going, in the 1960s, the birth control pill, that drug derailed the feminist movement. You might be thinking, why did it set it off course just a bit? Well, because the feminist movement, what are the themes that we were talking about earlier? It was to seek what? Economic, social, political equality, right? But the birth control pill, what it did is it allowed women to start to experiment, and it changed this movement of social equality to now a movement of sexual equality, where women can now be as sexual, quote unquote, as men without having the repercussions of having, to fear pregnancy. So this really changed the dynamic of the feminist movement and redefined it in America. And interestingly enough, just to talk about, comparing Islam with this feminist movement to keep in line with this, birth control, I mean, Islam has pages of hadith, commentary from the Prophet, peace be upon him, to the right to birth control. And ultimately, Islam's views on it today, though scholars do differ, some scholars do say that it's completely okay and that it's in the hands of a woman depending upon her health and well-being. And this was a very proactive and advanced way of thinking at the time, which was very different to the way that it was professed and expressed in the American community, where birth control now gave them the right to experiment and to become a little bit more promiscuous, versus Islam did it, allowed for it. Obviously, I mean, scholars, talked about it once the birth control pill was created. But Islam's view on it was to allow for family planning and a form of ease for the family. In the 1970s, in America, divorce then became a new fad. That was another thing that happened. The divorce rate actually rose over 50% by the mid-1970s. And at that time, a woman was expected to do it all. I mean, she was expected to work in and outside of the home, and she succeeded in being able to have multiple partners. And just to talk a little bit about divorce and the way Islam views that, in Islam, women cannot be forced into any marriage, contrary to some stereotypes. The only thing that parents have the right to do for a woman is to tell her who they do not recommend that she marry, but they cannot force her to marry someone that she does not want to marry. So you see the difference? If there's somebody that a young woman would like to marry, but the parents or wali or whatnot, the actual guardian of the girl says, I really something about his character or something just isn't off, they have the right to kind of prevent it from happening. But if let's say a father, an uncle, or whatever, a guardian says, I want you to marry my cousin's son's friend, they cannot force a Muslim woman to do so. So contrary to the common belief, I guess. And in addition to that, if women find themselves though wanting a divorce, divorce is allowed in Islam. There are certain religions out there today that don't allow divorce that don't allow divorce at all, and women are subjected to a lifetime of abuse. But in Islam, God wouldn't put this on women. Divorce is allowed, and God says that not only is divorce allowed, but that men need to leave women in a civil manner. Civil manner. This was explicitly said in a verse in the Quran. And to grant her her rights and to be fair, and not to subject her to any form of oppression. And this was, 1,400 years ago, right? And how many nasty divorces have we seen in the world? Granted, we have this, you can say the argument of what the Quran says and then what certain people choose to abide by. But what's explicit in the Quran cannot be argued. What's right and what's wrong cannot be argued. That what's right is what's written from the Islamic perspective in the Quran. And that is what Muslims are obligated to adhere to. So Muslims are obligated to adhere to justice and to adhere to women's rights and to adhere to the power that God gave to women. Then to continue on, in the 1980s, people had more wealth and they became kind of sick of divorce, and this sort of anti-feminist movement began. And then today, as an American woman myself, I know that most of us redefine our role as women in society constantly. It's a continuously evolving process. We're not really entirely clear about how to best balance our multiple social roles, but yet we're ever hopeful that, we can try and juggle it all. We commit to years of studying and working, and then when we're done and we choose to start a family, we ironically experience lots of guilt. Guilt when we leave our families to pursue our passion, to pursue our career, and then guilt when we leave our careers to stay with our other passion, our families. So what's the answer? Well, I don't really think I personally have found the answer. I'm trying. But what Islam says is going back to our intrinsic nature as women. And what is that? It's going back to the basics, to feed our soul. And feeding our soul from an Islamic lens translates to reconnecting with God. Modern feminists use a model that often uses men as the measuring stick. As we talked about earlier, how we became where we are today from the feministic movement. Men are now our measuring stick. It was always, let's compare ourselves to men's rights. Let's compare ourselves to what men have. Let's compare ourselves to what women don't have as compared to men. But why was the argument even meant to women in the first place? You know, why don't we go back to, as Muslims, our perspective is that when we go back to our basics, our soul, our spirit, and that women are not forced to compete with men or to attract men. You know, we're not looking at that those two types of movements, but it's important to note that Islam teaches women that women's purpose in life is not to do those things, but to please God. Simply. Purely, that's it. And so, if we look at even linguistically speaking, because interestingly enough, in the Arabic language, there aren't any real coincidences per se. It's a very consistent language, grammatically, with root words, linguistically. So interestingly enough, when we try to look at even the intrinsic nature of women, the word for mercy in Arabic is rahma, which comes from, similarly, the root word of womb in Arabic, which is rahim, right? And so this linguistic overlap shows that even from the Arabic, linguistical aspect, that women are intrinsically merciful. Women have this intrinsic compassion. Women have this intrinsic sense of nurture. Even physiologically speaking, women are shown to have higher levels of oxytocin, which is told to be said to be the love drug. This is the drug the hormone that gives us our warm fuzzies. And this is actually the hormone that's increased during labor. And it's the hormone, that's been shown to be related to increased levels of generosity. Certain, current research is showing. So interestingly enough, as women, obviously there's a lot of variability within even the spectrum of women. I don't mean to just be stereotypical, but just generally speaking, women, we have this intrinsic nature to be more nurturing, compassionate, loving, generous, in those terms, more touchy-feely, And so when we go back to our intrinsic nature as women, that's when we really find ourselves. When the Prophet Muhammad came to town to spread the message of Islam, he said, "I have come to free you from the shackles of mankind and to bring you to the servitude of the Lord of mankind." So this is the purpose of Islam. This is the view of Muslims. It's, it's a form of liberation. And this seeps to the men and women in society, that Islam liberates us. It liberates us from feeling the need to follow certain societal norms that might be disempowering to us emotionally, physically, psychologically, mentally. I mean, let's look at our commercials. Let's look at media. Let's look at what we're told to look like or be like, and how much pressure it is to always have to look so perfect, or how much pressure it is to be those types of things that we weren't necessarily made to really envelop. And in pre-Islamic societies, interestingly enough, female infants, sadly, were buried alive. And Islam corrected this explicitly. In the Quran it stated, وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ, and that is, the infant that was buried, she will ask on the day of judgment, بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ, by what crime did I commit for you to kill me? What did I do for you to kill me? This is a form of infanticide, which we do see, sadly, today in certain areas around the world, but Islam corrected that. In pre-Islamic societies, women were traded, just like horses or packages of trade, and women were traded off as business deals between men. And even after the two great religions had already come, Christianity and Judaism, women were still in a situation where they were still bartered for. And not only that, women could not, obviously, inherit, since they were inheritance, and own land, because they were considered property themselves, sadly, pre-Islamic. Islam came also to correct this. In pre-Islamic societies, women did not have a political say in society as regards to voting or lawmaking, but Islam came and corrected this as well. Islam came and brought a just message to change all of the aforementioned crimes that were committed against women. And the Quran provides us with a wealth of examples of women in the history of Islam that are liberated from the shackles of this world in an effort to worship God, as we were saying earlier, which was our purpose. Every story of the Quran tells us that if we can recognize who we are as worshipers of God, then our societal roles become something that we can manage and interact with confidence and with clarity. And when we are devoted to God, that our life is simply filled with worship of God. And that is the true definition of Abdullah, to be a slave of God. And a slave has a very negative connotation, but it's a devotee of God. And I'd also like to share, before I go into some various examples of the Quran and certain women in the Quran, my definition of what Muslim means to me. Muslim, linguistically speaking, is one who surrenders to the will of God in an effort to attain inner peace. That is what a Muslim is. And so I believe that women that came before our modern label of what Islam is, which was post-Muhammad era, Maryam, Mary, Asya, Hannah, Bilqis, Zulaykha, all of these women that are placed in the Quran that came before Prophet Muhammad were Muslim by the essence of this definition. So I want to go into starting off with Mary's mother, the mother of Maryam. In Arabic it's Maryam, in English it's Mary. Hannah. Hannah was the mother of Maryam. And she represents, interestingly, before I also go through that, if you, whatever issue that you have, you can relate, as a woman, you can relate to stories in the Quran. There's the single mother, example. There's the example of a happily married woman that had trouble conceiving. There's the woman that's not happily married and has children. There's so many examples that we have this ability, I guess psychologists call it narrative overlap, where you hear someone else's narrative and then you think back to your own story, your own narrative, and you're able to relate, and this is what builds that bond. So the beautiful thing about the Quran is that you're able to overlap with the stories that are placed in the Quran. That's the most important thing. When you read and you go home, it's not necessarily just say, okay, I recited, Surah Shu'ara, great, thanks, okay, let's go. No, it's to really deliberate, to really contemplate, to really connect with it of those narrative overlaps. So in any case, let's have our narrative overlaps. Hannah, the mother of Maryam, she represents all happily married women, I guess, that have trouble conceiving. She had trouble conceiving, and when she finally became pregnant, her reaction to it was a reaction of a person who understood her priorities. She was a deep believer, and her reaction to the one thing that she had wanted was to give it back to God. Look at that, that's beautiful. She'd been wanting this thing forever and ever and ever. When she finally got it, she said, God, whatever is in my womb is for you. I sacrifice this child for you, for your service. This child will serve the temple. And she had promised God to give her child to the temple. And interestingly enough, at the time, you need to note that girls were actually not allowed in the Jewish temple at that time. And so when she gave birth to a girl, they didn't have ultrasound, sonography, and all that great stuff that we have today. She didn't know until she gave birth. And when she gave birth to a girl, this was really a test of her perseverance and her sincerity to what she had said earlier to God. But she was a woman that had her priorities straight, was extremely devoted to God. And she feared what would happen, but she stuck with it. And she said, this is what I had said, and this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to give my child to the temple. And God reveals in the Quran a description of this account by saying that the woman here is much better than the boy that you had expected. And Hannah gave her daughter Maryam to be raised by Maryam's uncle, Zechariah, or Zechariah in biblical references, who was a prophet himself who lived in the temple. And this begins to tell us a story of what seems to be of us a superwoman, right? As women in Islam, we're taught that our first obligation is to God, not someone's wife. You're not someone's daughter. You're not someone's mother. You're not, so-and-so's cousin. You are first a worshiper of God. And Hannah set an example of this. She dedicated the baby to the temple despite it being a social impossibility to do so due to the restrictions of the temple. And due to her dedication, she actually turned her culture upside down. Maryam now represents all single mothers out there. Maryam was a child who was raised in the temple. And let's try to, think about this. Can you imagine a girl that you're in a society where, first of all, women are not allowed to go into a place of religious worship. You're not even allowed to go. Okay, women aren't even allowed to go. Let's just try to put that into our perspective. And then not only were women not allowed to go into the temples at the time, but now you have this girl who's raised in the temple. Can you imagine the amount of gossip that was potentially going on? About what's Maryam up to? What's going on with that? Oh, did you hear about this? Oh, what did the sheikh say? Or, there's a lot of chit chatter about what's going on with Maryam and Maryam's life, and really interesting life, very different. She was not like the rest. And so then, can you imagine what talk would happen after the virgin birth? The scandal? You know, what would happen after that? Oh my gosh, this girl thinks she's all that, and my mom kept telling me to be more like Miriam, you know, and now she's here pregnant, you know? And so, you know, subhanAllah, her strength is phenomenal. If we backtrack a little bit before the scandal, I wanted to give an example of how strong she was in her piety and her faith. She taught her uncle Zachariah things about God due to her intimate relationship with God. When all of a sudden one day, you know, Zachariah came and saw that she had these fruits that he had not given to her, because he's her provider, he feeds her. So whatever it is that he does not give to her, he questions, where did you get it from? And she was very strong in saying, this is from God, and God gives to whomever he wills without limit. This is the exact verse in the Quran, that's exactly what it says. And because of this, Zachariah thought to himself, she's absolutely right. I mean, there are things that come from Allah, from God, that I'm not in control of. Obviously, everything is from God. And he was given motivation to make supplication, to make dua, or supplication, to pray for a child. And that's something beyond the scope of this talk. But she was just very strong enough to the point where she was able to inspire others to become even more faithful, even her own mentors. Then Maryam became pregnant. And I want to also compare what the Bible talks, how the Bible represents Maryam and how the Quran talks about Maryam. In that, in the Quran, differing from the Bible, Maryam is depicted as a stronger woman, not necessarily afraid of Gabriel as it is written in the Bible, but more so defensive or even offensive. When Gabriel came to her in the form of a man, she said, you know, who do you think you are? I'm a chaste woman, and that is not going to change back up. And Gabriel said, I'm a messenger from God. And she was like, oh yeah, you're a messenger from God, right. And then, you know, Gabriel passed the message that, you know, God says, kun fayakun, which means be, and it will be. And the Spirit, you know, was breathed into her, and she became pregnant. And she dealt with this pregnancy all alone. I mean, I don't know if, and there are people here in the audience, I'm assuming, that have been pregnant before. I haven't, so I can't relate to this. But I'm assuming it's very painful to have to stretch and grow and be uncomfortable and morning sickness and all those things that are, you know, that are related to being pregnant, and then dealing with that all alone. And then when she gave birth, again, all alone, without epidurals, mind you, she goes back to her people, and she points to the child. And she doesn't say anything, and the child speaks. And this is who? Jesus. Isa. And this is also another example of a superwoman in Islam. I mean, she had complete confidence in who she was. She was a servant of God, and like her mother, she knew that that was her primary role. She wasn't diminished because she wasn't married, and she wasn't diminished because she wasn't someone's wife in the community. She was complete as a woman due to her establishment of her intimate relationship with God. And on top of that, she carried the job of being Jesus' mother, which is not an easy task, and certainly equal to the job of a prophet. I mean, she received an angel, and she faced people with ridicule. That's what prophets do. And if we continue on with some other stories, let's break some stereotypes here about women. Zulaykha. Who was Zulaykha? Anybody know who Zulaykha was? No? Okay. You guys know the story of Joseph, right? The prophet Joseph. So Joseph was said to be an extremely handsome individual. And he was not only a prophet, but he was actually a slave in the home of a very rich individual. And Zulaykha was this rich individual's wife, who happened to also be extremely attracted to Yusuf, alayhi salam. And he was said, Yusuf alayhi salam was said to have 99% of all of the beauty of humanity. So, I mean, ladies, any good-looking guy that you can imagine, don't really imagine it, but any good-looking guy you can imagine, he's far more better looking than that. And he also had the light of prophethood too in him. So he was beautiful on the inside as well. And Zulaykha was interested in him. And anyone that wants to say that, I'm going to just put it out there, that, Muslim women are extremely, repressed and they don't have any form of like sexual drive or whatever, they need to pick up the Quran and read it. This Quran is an example of Muslim women. Now, obviously what Zulaykha did before she repented was a horrible thing. She closed the door behind her and she tried to seduce him. And Yusuf, alayhi salam, it said that he had wanted her as well, but if he did not have the level of God consciousness, he would have fallen in sin. But because he was so God conscious that he was able to get out of that situation. And then there was so much talk in town. Oh, did you hear about Zulaykha? She wanted to seduce her slave. Oh my God. And so she was like, all right, I'll show you guys. Come on over. Let's just come on over and visit. So a bunch of her friends came over and she gave them fruits and she gave them, knives to cut their fruit. And then she was like, Yusuf, serve us our tea. Yusuf walks out and all these women gawk and cut themselves accidentally. Now what Zulaykha had wanted, they want too. So Yusuf alayhi salam chose jail rather than falling into sin. But what's interesting is that Zulaykha afterwards, when she got back to her senses, she asked for forgiveness. She repented. And in turning to God, the fire of desire was extinguished from her. And interesting to note that Islam sees that our natural human desires are there, and as women, that we're not any less, expressive of our emotions than men are, but that when we turn to God, and that when we keep God our primary focus, and worshiping God our primary role, that everything seems to fall into place. Now let's look at Asya. No matter how bad your husband is out there, it's really hard to compete with having Pharaoh as your husband, really. Anybody worse than Pharaoh. He claimed to be God himself, but Asya, his wife, was a worshiper of God. And ultimately, it's really almost enough that she was living with a man who felt like he could defy everything and that he could claim to be God himself. And this was at a time also when Pharaoh had that dream about a boy one day growing up and taking his place. So he decided to kill all the boys. And his wife, Asya, came home with a baby boy that she found in the river, right? And I mean, if you were killing babies off and then all of a sudden your wife comes to you and says, hey, I found this random baby boy in a river, you kind of be a little suspicious. But subhanAllah, he wasn't. Well, actually he was, but Asya persuaded him to raise this child in the palace, which shows you that, these stories that we might have in our society of, well, my husband doesn't want me to pray, or my husband doesn't want me to wear hijab, or my husband wants me to look cute outside, or my husband wants me to, doesn't want me to go to school, or whatever. It's just an example of, when you have your own ability to persuade, and you're strong enough to have your own opinions, and then, if Asya could persuade Pharaoh to raise the child in the palace, obviously we're not all like Asya, but subhanAllah, it's a form of inspiration and motivation to try to achieve that level of piety, of confidence, and of willpower as a believer in God, as a believer in the tenets of God. And then we also have the story of Balqis, which was a ruler. She was a ruler of a country, and she was highly revered for her wisdom. And she really represents a career woman. She was painted in a beautiful light in the Quran. This was related to the Prophet Sulaiman or Solomon. And this really represents the career women that are out there. So that was just really a quick rundown of just a few things that are placed in the Quran of certain women in the Quran. Every story of the Quran, tells us that if we recognize who we are as servants to God, that our societal roles will become something that we can manage and interact with. Now, to go back to certain examples of women in history, and also what Islam gives to women, let's talk about education. So, women's rights to education. That the right to an education is not just a right in Islam, but actually a responsibility to Muslim women. That there is a hadith that said that the first school of a child is the mother's arms. and depicting the importance of an educated mother, a mother that understands the world, that is wise, and that is able to raise future generations that are extremely educated and capable. The Prophet Muhammad encouraged women and men to seek knowledge from cradle to grave. And in addition, the first revealed word of the Quran was the command to all of mankind to what? Recite, read, not pray, oh humanity. No, it was recite, read, Iqra, Bismi Rabbika alladhi khalaq, by the name of the Lord that created you. And it was addressed to all of humankind. It wasn't just like, oh yeah, just you guys. Don't forget about the, yeah, we don't want those women. It was all of humanity, all of humanity. Islam makes it a point to juxtapose humanity from other species as well within the animal kingdom and explicitly contrast how humans have been blessed with a mind that sets us apart from the animal world, that we have the ability to reason and to read. Now, to continue on with this theme of education, let's talk about a Muslim woman during the time of the